In the 2024 presidential election, the state of Arkansas voted 64% for Republican nominee Donald Trump. However, in the 1924 presidential election, the state of Arkansas voted 61% for Democratic nominee John Davis. So, what happened? How did one of the bluest states in the whole country flip to being a Republican stronghold? To truly understand why Arkansas was blue in the first place, we need to understand that the Democratic Party back in 1830. The Democratic Party in 1830 was a conservative party supporting slavery in the South and attempted to keep the balance of free and slave states. This was so that no one side, free or slave states, could have more representation in the U.S. Senate, which gives each state 2 senators regardless of population. However, as states kept getting added to the Union, these states continued to get more and more free than slave states. This made Democrats, and of course pro-slavery people, incredibly angry. The Democrats were angry because their voting base was angry. The southern states was where most Democratic support came from. Southern Democrats were usually the only states consistently voting Democrat, as the North was a Republican stronghold. In 1860, an election was held to decide the future of the country. As I'm sure you're aware, Republican Abraham Lincoln won the election handedly, winning all the northern states. Southern Democrats had split the ticket after they were so furious with their nominee, Stephen Douglas, that they seceded to form their own party, the Southern Democratic Party, to nominate incumbent Vice President John Breckinridge as their nominee. They only won states in the South, obviously. Oh, and there was a Constitutional Unionist Party as well, but they didn't do as well and they weren't really that important. Before Abraham Lincoln had even taken office, he was governing less states than had participated in the election, as these 11 southern states seceded from the Union to form the Confederate States of America. So yes, it is true that most of the people who left the Union to form the Confederacy identified as Democrats. However, they also identified as conservatives. As you may be aware, the South lost the Civil War and they were readmitted into the Union. However, they decided to keep voting Democrat for a whole century after this war. In fact, the only Confederate state that voted Republican from 1880 to 1928 was the state of Tennessee in the 1920 election, voting for Warren Harding. In 1928, a few more southern states did vote red, but the Great Depression allowed Democrats to continue doing well as it was caused under a Republican, Herbert Hoover, in 1929. In the 1960 election, 100 years after the southern states started to secede, Democratic nominee John F. Kennedy still got most of his voter base from the South. Kennedy did especially well in Georgia, North and South Carolina, and Texas, where his running mate Lyndon Johnson was from. However, this Democratic coalition in the South was apparently very fragile, despite voting consistently blue for over 100 years. I say that because after the unfortunate assassination of President Kennedy on the 22nd of November 1963, Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States, and one of the very first things he did in office was pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the act that gave African Americans equal rights to white Americans. The Southern voter bloc was outraged. At the 1964 election, Lyndon Johnson was running against Barry Goldwater. Johnson was seen as the clear frontrunner for many good reasons. Johnson was seen as the objectively better and more sane choice for president. Goldwater was seen as a racist lunatic who would destroy the nation. However, that kind of language was what especially captivated the Southern voting bloc, upset with Johnson's passage of the Civil Rights Act. Goldwater and other Republicans used the Southern strategy to captivate more Southern votes into their party. This strategy consisted of appealing to white voters in the South by using racist dog whistles against African Americans. This Southern strategy is very clearly not a myth. Goldwater became the first Republican to win all the states in the Deep South since Reconstruction. In fact, the 1964 election was the first time that Georgia had voted Republican in history. Okay, so that would explain why a state like Mississippi would have flipped from blue to red. But Arkansas voted Democrat in 1964 as well. At what point does Arkansas go from solidly blue to solidly red? Well, it wasn't in 1968, as Arkansas did not vote for the Democratic nor the Republican nominee, because they voted for American Independent nominee George Wallace. Wallace was a Democrat from Alabama. He too was upset with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and decided to run as a third party in this election after supporting Goldwater 4 years ago. In 1968, Richard Nixon saw most of his support come from the western states. But in 1972, Nixon won re-election with massive nationwide support. He won 49 states, including Arkansas, to win 520 electoral votes. He only lost Massachusetts and the District of Columbia. I don't believe it's fair to say that Arkansas was a solidly red state by 1972, especially considering they voted for Democrat Jimmy Carter in 1976. To be fair though, all the southern states except for Virginia voted for Carter. Arkansas then voted Republican 3 straight times in 1980, 1984, and 1988. But still, most of the country voted for Republicans in these elections. Reagan won 51% in 1980, 59% in 1984, and Bush won 53% in 1988. In 1992, Arkansas had the chance to prove if they were truly Republican or not when the Democratic governor of that state, Bill Clinton, ran for president in 1992. They voted blue. Only Tennessee, Louisiana, and Georgia also voted blue with Arkansas. Governor Clinton continued to win Arkansas in 1996. However, the favorite son strategy was, and to an extent still is, a widely documented electoral strategy, which insinuates that a state will vote for a candidate no matter the party if they are from their state or a nearby state. So I do not believe it's 100% true to judge Arkansas for this, especially since they have voted red in every election since 2000. So in conclusion, it's fair to say that Arkansas probably flipped to a Republican stronghold sometime in the 80s, much later than other southern states, who flipped sometime in the 60s. Stick around for next time where I go over how California managed to avoid having slavery in their state and got incorporated as a free state.